The photo wasn't a blurry, long-distance shot. It was clear, damning. There was Julian, in the crisp blue shirt I'd ironed that morning, his posture relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. And there was her. A woman maybe 15 years younger, with a cascade of honey blonde hair, a fitted red dress, and a laugh that seemed to leap from the image. Their fingers were intertwined. It was an intimate, casual clasp that spoke of a practiced familiarity. The world, the warm scent of bread, the soft hum of the refrigerators, the neat columns of numbers on my invoices, shimmered and dissolved. All that remained was that digital square of betrayal. Thomas's follow-up message was a clinical log. 6:42 p.m. Subject and female companion enter Vincenzo's, on 5th Street appear affectionate. Will await exit. I didn't cry. The cold, hard stone of rage that had settled in my chest the night before now expanded, crystallizing into something sharp and purposeful. Grief would come later. Now there was only the evidence, and the need to know its full, horrible shape. I finished the invoices with robotic precision. I closed the bakery, the click of the lock sounding final. At home, the silence was no longer thick. It was empty, a vacuum waiting to be filled with the truth. Thomas's updates arrived like dispatches from a foreign war. 9:15 p.m. Subjects leave restaurant. Appear to be in high spirits. Enter subject's vehicle. 9:32 p.m. Vehicle parks at the Belvedere Hotel. Enter together through main entrance. The Belvedere. A place we'd stayed once for our 25th anniversary. Julian had complained about the price. I'd loved the view. I sat in the dark living room, the glow of my phone the only light. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching a play about someone else's ruined life. The part of me that was Juliet, the wife of 40 years, was receding. In her place was someone colder, clearer, a strategist. The next morning, Julian returned just after dawn. He moved with a quiet, almost furtive energy, smelling of hotel soap and stale air. He didn't see me sitting in the armchair by the window. "Rough night," he mumbled, heading for the shower. The meeting ran late, then the client wanted to talk strategy over drinks. I just crashed at a hotel to avoid driving tired. The lie was so smooth, so effortless. It wasn't the infidelity that cut the deepest in that moment. It was the calm proficiency of his deceit. The man I'd shared a bed with for 4 decades was a stranger who could look me in the eye and fabricate a whole alternate reality. That was smart, I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly steady. Safety first. He paused, glancing at me, a flicker of something. Surprise? Relief. In his tired eyes. Yeah, exactly. Once he was in the shower, I moved. I went to the garage. The SUV sat there, an accomplice. I opened the passenger door. The glove compartment. The tube was still there, that slick, plastic monument to my humiliation. I stared at it, and the cold strategist in my mind saw not just an object of betrayal, but an opportunity. A plan, cruel and perfect, began to form. It wasn't enough to confront him. He would lie, he would gaslight, he would make me feel crazy. I needed a consequence he couldn't talk his way out of. A consequence that would match the vulgar, sticky reality of his secret. I drove to a hardware store across town. I bought a tube of industrial-strength superglue, the kind advertised to bond metal, plastic, anything in seconds. I paid in cash. Back in the garage, my hands were perfectly steady. I opened the glove compartment. I took out the half-used tube of lubricant. I carefully, methodically, squeezed its entire contents onto a rag, which I buried at the bottom of the trash. Then, I took the new tube of superglue. I peeled off its label and, with a small, precise pair of scissors, I carefully cut and shaped the lubricant tube's label to fit over it. It wasn't perfect, but in a dim car interior, in a moment of hurried passion, it would pass. I placed the decoy tube back in the exact spot, nestled beside the car manual. I closed the glove box. I wiped down every surface I'd touched. My heart was a quiet, determined drum. This wasn't about causing pain for pain's sake. This was about making the hidden undeniable. It was about translating his secret into a language everyone could understand. I went back inside. Julian was making coffee, dressed for another day of lies. "Big day today?" I asked, pouring myself a glass of water. "Another dinner," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Potential investors. Might be late again." "Of course," I said. "Do what you need to do." He left. I didn't hire Thomas to follow him that day. I didn't need to. I knew the script. Instead, I baked. I lost myself in the alchemy of flour, butter, and sugar, things that behaved predictably, that transformed under honest effort. I made a lemon drizzle cake, Julian's favorite. The irony was not lost on me. The hours ticked by. Evening fell. I imagined the scene, the dinner, the laughter, the drive to the hotel, the fumbling in the dark car, the reach into the glove compartment, the frantic, confused struggle as the lubricant failed to behave as expected, instead bonding skin to skin, fabric to vinyl, creating a grotesque, inescapable tableau. I sat on the porch, the lemon cake uneaten on the kitchen counter. The neighborhood was quiet. Then, in the distance, the first distinctive wail of a siren. Then another. They grew louder, converging not on the main road, but weaving into our very subdivision. My phone, face down on the wicker table beside me, remained silent. Julian didn't call. The sirens stopped, close by. Too close. I stood up, my pulse a steady, cold rhythm in my ears. I walked to the end of our driveway. 2 streets over, at the Miller's cul-de-sac, I could see the flashing red and white lights of an ambulance and a fire truck, their strobing glow painting the trees in urgent, panic-stricken colors. A small crowd had gathered. I walked toward it, my steps measured, a spectator drawn to the scene of an accident I had engineered. As I neared, the details came into focus. It was Julian's SUV, parked haphazardly on the curb outside the Miller's house. The passenger door was wide open. A firefighter was crouched beside it, his head inside, his voice a low, professional murmur. Another was unpacking a specialized kit from the truck. And then I saw them. On the sidewalk, under the harsh artificial light, stood Julian and the woman from the photo. They were wrapped in silver emergency blankets, but that wasn't what made people stare, their hands hastily averted. Their hands were obscured by large white bundles of gauze and padding. But it was clear they were attached, not holding hands, but fused in a clumsy, desperate-looking clump. Julian's face was a mask of utter horror and humiliation. The woman, her beautiful hair disheveled, her red dress torn at the shoulder, was sobbing hysterically, her free hand covering her face. A firefighter was speaking to them gently, explaining the process of solvent application to dissolve the adhesive. The words industrial strength and patient separation floated over the murmuring crowd. Our neighbor, old Mr. Henderson, caught my eye from across the street. His expression was one of profound pity. He shuffled over. "Juliet. My God. Are you all right?" We heard the screaming. Called 911. They were stuck. In the car. He couldn't bring himself to elaborate. I looked past him to where my husband stood, handcuffed not by law, but by his own lies and a tube of superglue, exposed under the neighborhood's unforgiving gaze. The secret was secret no more. It was a public spectacle, a farcical, painful monument to his betrayal. I met Julian's eyes across the flashing lights. In his, I saw the collapse of his entire fabricated world, the shock, the terror, and dawning, agonizing comprehension. In mine, he saw only the cold, clear reflection of the truth he'd forced me to find. I turned and walked back toward my dark, quiet house. The first part was over. The consequences, for all of us, had only just begun. I approached Julian's SUV, its dark silhouette menacing in the sterile garage light. I didn't feel like a vengeful wife. I felt like a surgeon preparing to operate on a tumor, the tumor of his deceit, their conspiracy. The air still smelled faintly of her perfume. I aimed the phone's beam at the passenger side door. The memory of the superglue was still fresh, a brutal public exposure. That had been about shattering their facade. This was about preemption. About stopping the theft they were planning. I opened the passenger door. The overhead light clicked on, a small, guilty glow. The glove compartment, of course, was the obvious place. But Julian wasn't a stupid man. After the superglue incident, he'd be paranoid. He'd find another spot. I ran my hand along the underside of the dashboard, feeling for anything taped. Nothing. I checked the center console, under the floor mats. I was about to give up when my fingers brushed against a subtle seam in the side panel of the driver's seat, near the seatbelt buckle. It was a little loose. With a careful tug, the panel came away slightly. And there, tucked into the seat's metal frame, was a slim, black USB drive. My breath caught. The fake contracts. The notary details. Everything. I slipped it out, my hands steady. Back in the kitchen, I plugged it into my laptop. A single folder, cryptically named Project Phoenix. Inside were scanned documents, a timeline, emails. It was all there. A fraudulent power of attorney document bearing a crude imitation of my signature, giving Julian control over the bakery's assets. Drafts of property transfer papers for our house. A timeline with chillingly efficient steps. Secure PA. Liquidate business assets. Initiate voluntary retirement community placement for Juliet. The last line made me physically ill. And emails. Not just between Julian and Allison, but with a shady-looking notary public named Gerald, who promised discretion for a premium. They discussed me as the asset and the liability. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a corporate takeover of my life. I copied everything onto my own secure drive, then carefully wiped my fingerprints from the USB and returned it to its hiding place in the car. The tumor was documented. Now I needed the cure. The next day, I didn't go to the bakery. I told Julian I had a migraine, a believable lie, given the shadows under my eyes. Instead, I went to see my lawyer, Evelyn Shaw, a sharp woman in her 50s who had handled the bakery's incorporation. I laid the flash drive on her polished mahogany desk. I need a preemptive strike, Evelyn. And I need it quiet. She reviewed the files, her expression growing colder with each click of the mouse. This is conspiracy to commit fraud. Grand larceny. The notary alone could lose his license and face jail time. She looked up at me. What's your goal, Juliet? A messy, public divorce? Criminal charges. I thought of the superglue, the flashing lights, the humiliation. That had been a reaction. This needed to be a strategy. I want them neutralized, I said, my voice flat. I want the business and the house locked down so tight they can't touch a single brick or a dollar of flour. I want a divorce, but on my terms, with this evidence held in reserve. And I want Daniel protected. Your son may not want protecting from his wife, Evelyn cautioned. He will when he sees this, I said, pushing a printed photo of the hotel balcony kiss across the desk. Evelyn nodded, a slow, grim smile touching her lips. Understood. We'll start with a restraining order based on the evidence of conspiracy and emotional distress. It will freeze any joint assets and give us control. Then we move to file for divorce citing adultery and fraud. We'll send a copy of the evidence to the district attorney's office and the Notary Public Commission. Anonymously, for now. That should make Mr. Gerald very eager to cooperate with us instead of them. It was a declaration of war, served with legal letterhead. The following week, I played my part perfectly. I signed the important business papers Julian gave me, but only after Evelyn had reviewed and amended them into meaningless gibberish. I listened to his lies about clients and meetings, my face a mask of weary acceptance. The trap was set. The spring came not from me, but from Allison. Greedy, impatient Allison. She came to the bakery on a Thursday afternoon, a time she knew I'd be alone between the lunch rush and the school pickup crowd. She was wearing one of her expensive office dresses, her smile sharp enough to cut cake. "Juliet," she said, her tone dripping with false concern. "You look exhausted. This business is too much for you." Julian and I were talking. "Maybe it's time to think about slowing down. We could handle the expansion. You could relax." I looked up from the tray of lemon tarts I was glazing. "We?" "Julian and I," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We have a lot of ideas for the brand. Modernizing it." I put down my pastry brush. "And what does Daniel think of these ideas?" A flicker of irritation crossed her face. "Daniel is supportive. He wants what's best for the family." I walked to the sink, washing the sugar from my hands with deliberate slowness. "Is that what you call it? What's best for the family?" I turned, leaning against the counter. "Tell me, Allison, when you and Julian were on the balcony at the Belvedere, planning to have that old hag declared incompetent and steal her life's work, was that for the family too?" Her face went from smug to bloodless in an instant. The color drained, leaving 2 bright spots of shock on her cheeks. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The bell over the bakery door jingled. It was Evelyn Shaw, right on schedule, accompanied by a uniformed process server. "Allison Roberts," the server said, his voice official and loud in the quiet bakery. Allison spun around, her eyes wide. "You have been served." He handed her a thick envelope. "Restraining order and notice of intent to file for dissolution of marriage on behalf of Juliet Roberts, naming you as a correspondent." Evelyn stepped forward, her gaze icy. "My client is also filing a civil suit against you and Julian Roberts for conspiracy to commit fraud. All business and marital assets are frozen as of this moment. I would advise you to contact your own attorney. Do not attempt to contact Mrs. Roberts or come near any of her properties." Allison stood frozen, the legal documents trembling in her hand. She looked from Evelyn's stern face to my calm one. The reality of her situation, the exposed affair, the failed plot, the legal avalanche, crashed down on her. The cunning ambition in her eyes shattered, replaced by raw, animal panic. She didn't say a word. She turned and fled, the door slamming shut behind her, the bell clanging a frantic, discordant note. I looked at Evelyn. "Phase 1. Phase 1, she confirmed. "Julian will be served at his office within the hour. The anonymous packets to the DA and the Notary Commission went out this morning." I looked around my bakery. The smell of yeast and sugar, the warm light, the trays of honest, beautiful work. It was still mine. It would remain mine. The war wasn't over. Julian would rage. Daniel would be heartbroken. There would be fallout, scandal, pain. But the first crucial battle had been won not with screams, but with silence. Not with tears, but with evidence. And the woman they'd called that old hag was no longer their victim. She was their problem. Caught in the act. The whispers swelled into a collective gasp as the fire crew emerged, bearing their unusual, sheet-draped burden. Julian and Allison were not just being rescued, they were being paraded, a grotesque tableau of their own making. The superglue had done its job too well. Their attempts to separate had only fused them more tightly, skin to skin in a horrifying, intimate knot, forcing the firefighters to carry them out together on a single wide stretcher. Daniel stood frozen on the porch, his face a mask of shock so profound it looked carved from ice. His uniform, a symbol of authority and rescue, seemed to mock him. He wasn't saving lives from a fire. He was presiding over the immolation of his family. "Chief," one of his younger crew members asked, voice hesitant. "The ambulance is here. Should we?" Daniel didn't seem to hear. His eyes were fixed on the writhing lump under the sheet, where his father's graying hair and Allison's blonde strands tangled together in a sweaty, desperate mess. A low, animal sound escaped Julian's lips, a mix of pain and utter humiliation. Allison had stopped sobbing. She was just whimpering, a broken, mechanical sound. From my perch at Mrs. Peterson's window, I watched it all unfold. The cold strategist in me noted the perfection of the exposure. The fire had been a minor, controlled distraction. The real inferno was the scandal, now raging uncontrollably through the neighborhood, soon to sweep through our entire lives. I pulled the headphones out, severing the audio link to the bedroom. I didn't need to hear any more. The picture was complete. The ambulance crew, trying to maintain professional decorum, rushed forward with shears and solvent kits, but the damage was done. Every neighbor with a smartphone had already captured the moment. The chief's own father and wife, carried out of the family home, glued together in an act of betrayal. The story would write itself. Mrs. Peterson turned from the window, her phone lowering. She looked at me, not with suspicion anymore, but with a deep, weary understanding. "Oh, Juliet," she breathed. "You knew." I met her gaze, my own eyes dry. "I found out. And the fire, the glue, consequences," I said simply. The word felt heavy and final. We watched as Daniel finally snapped into action, barking orders to clear the crowd, his voice cracking with a strain I'd never heard before. He helped load the stretcher into the ambulance, his movements stiff, avoiding looking at the shapes beneath the sheet. Just before the doors closed, he turned, and his eyes scanned the crowd. They landed on Mrs. Peterson's window. On me. Our eyes locked across the lawn, over the heads of gawking neighbors. In his, I saw the shattered pieces of his world, confusion, betrayal, a dawning, horrified comprehension. He knew. He knew I was here, watching. He knew I wasn't in Nashville. I didn't look away. I offered no apologetic smile, no wave. I just held his gaze, letting him see the woman he thought was his simple, hard-working mother. The woman who had baked his birthday cakes and kissed his scraped knees. The woman who had just engineered the most brutal possible revelation. He flinched, as if struck, then turned abruptly and climbed into the front of the ambulance as it pulled away, sirens now wailing a different kind of emergency. The show was over. The neighbors lingered, dissecting the drama in excited, hushed tones. I saw the story taking root, twisting into legend. The old baker wife who cooked up a revenge so sticky, the fire department had to peel them apart. I stood up. My coffee was cold. "Thank you for the chair, Eleanor," I said to Mrs. Peterson, using her first name for the first time in 20 years. "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice gentle. "To my bakery," I said. It was the only answer. The ovens would be warm. The dough would need kneading. It was a place of creation, not destruction. A place where I was still in control. As I walked out her front door, the chatter died instantly. Dozens of eyes turned to me. Pity, curiosity, a hint of fear. I ignored them all. I crossed the street, now littered with hose lines and tire marks, and walked up my own driveway. The front door hung splintered on its hinges. The smell of smoke and solvent lingered. I stepped inside. The house felt hollow, a stage after the actors had fled. I went straight to the bedroom. The air was thick with the acrid smell of the chemical solvent they'd used, undercut by something else. The scent of shame. The bed was a wreck of torn sheets. On the nightstand, the family photo frame lay face down. I righted it. Our smiling faces stared back, a fossil from an extinct era. I picked up Daniel's old recorder from behind it and pressed stop. The tiny red light went dark. The evidence was captured, but it was now redundant. The whole town was a witness. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Mrs. Roberts." It was a man's voice, brisk, official. "This is Dr. Evans at County General Emergency. Your husband and Ms. Thomas are here." The adhesive separation was successful, but there are significant epidermal abrasions. They are sedated. "Your husband is asking for you." I looked around the ruined bedroom. "Tell him I'm busy," I said, my voice calm. "And tell Ms. Thomas her husband, my son, will be making his own decisions shortly." I hung up. I had one more call to make. To Evelyn Shaw. The legal war was no longer a discreet filing. It was a public battlefield, and I held the high ground. But first, I had a bakery to run. There were orders to fill, bread to bake. The world, for all its chaos, still needed its simple, honest comforts. And that was something I knew how to provide. The game had changed. The hidden war was now a very public siege. And Juliet Roberts, the baker, was no longer hiding in her kitchen. She was standing in the wreckage, ready to rebuild her life on her own terms, one brick, and one loaf of bread, at a time. The bell above the bakery door chimed, a sound as familiar as my own heartbeat. It was late afternoon, the golden light slanting through the window and painting the rows of pastries in a warm, honeyed glow. The last of the day's customers had just left, and the air was settling, thick with the scent of sugar, yeast, and peace. I stood behind the counter, wiping flour from my hands onto my old apron. I looked out at the quiet street. The same street where, not so long ago, flashing lights and scandal had held a morbid carnival. Now, it was just a street again. Life, stubborn and ordinary, had reasserted itself. Daniel emerged from the back, a clipboard in his hand. He'd put on a little weight, the hollows in his cheeks filling out. The shadows under his eyes were lighter. Inventory's done, Mom. We're low on vanilla extract. I'll order some tomorrow. Thank you, Mijo, I said, my voice soft. The simple rhythm of our new life, the orders, the inventory, the shared meals, was a balm. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was an honest one, built on the rubble of the old. The scandal had raged like a brushfire and then burned itself out. Julian and Allison had become a lurid local footnote, a story people told with a shake of the head before moving on to fresher gossip. They'd signed the divorce papers, of course. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the photos, the audio, the very public humiliation, Julian had no fight left. He'd moved to a town 2 hours away. Allison had disappeared entirely, her name a bitter taste that was slowly fading. We never spoke of the mustard in the hospital, or the superglue, or the orchestrated smoke. Those were my secret weapons, buried now. Daniel had his suspicions, I'm sure. But he never asked. Some truths are too sharp to hold. We had a silent pact to build forward, not to dissect the ruins. One evening, as we closed up, Daniel lingered by the door. Mom, I've been thinking about the space next door. The hardware store that closed. I looked at him, curious. What about it? We could expand, he said, a tentative spark in his eyes I hadn't seen in months. Not just the bakery. A small cafe. Tables. Good coffee. A place for people to sit. You could teach a baking class on weekday mornings. He spoke quickly, the idea tumbling out. We could call it Juliet's Hearth. Juliet's Hearth. The name settled over me like a warm shawl. It spoke of warmth, of sustenance, of a center. Not just a business, but a home for others. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of a fierce, blooming hope. You've been thinking a lot. I have, he said, meeting my gaze. I can't change what happened, but I can help us build something new. Something that's just ours. I walked around the counter and took his face in my flour-dusted hands. It's a beautiful idea. The expansion became our shared project. It was hard work, negotiating the lease, dealing with contractors, choosing paint colors. But it was a clean, hard work. We argued about light fixtures and laughed over disastrous paint samples. With every decision, we were laying down new stones, not on a foundation of lies, but on one of mutual survival and slowly returning trust. The day we opened Juliet's Hearth, the bakery-turned-cafe was full. Not with the gawking curiosity of the scandal days, but with genuine warmth. Mrs. Peterson and her book club took the big table by the window. A young couple cooed over their baby in a corner. The air hummed with the sound of the new espresso machine and low, happy conversation. I stood behind the refurbished counter, now twice as long, watching Daniel move among the tables, refilling coffee cups with an ease that looked like healing. He caught my eye and smiled, a real unguarded smile that reached his eyes. A woman approached the counter, someone I didn't recognize. "You must be Juliet," she said. "I've heard about your flan for weeks. I had to come see the legend for myself." I handed her a plate, the caramel shimmering on top. "The legend is just a woman who knows how to get back up," I said. She smiled, understanding in her eyes. "The best kind of legend." Later, as the sunset painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, Daniel and I sat at the last empty table, sharing a slice of the celebratory cake. The cafe was quiet, filled with the comfortable silence of a job well done. "We did good, Mom," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "We did," I agreed. I looked around Juliet's hearth. At the warm light on the walls we'd painted together. At the ovens that had been my silent partners through joy and devastation. At my son who had walked through fire, literal and figurative, and emerged, scarred but standing tall beside me. The revenge had been cold, strategic, and necessary. It had cleared the poisoned ground. But this slow, deliberate building, this quiet companionship with my son, this creation of a space that offered simple sweetness to the world, this was the victory. It wasn't about winning against Julian and Allison. It was about winning back myself, and forging a future from the pieces they'd left behind. I took a bite of the cake. It was sweet, but not cloying. Rich but honest. A perfect balance, like the peace I had finally found. The story of the betrayed baker wife was over. Now began the story of Juliet, the woman who owned her own hearth. And it was a story I was finally ready to live.